The hospital ceiling had 47 tiles. I had counted them 3 times that first night, lying flat on my back with my left leg bound in a plastic brace and my collarbone wrapped so tight I could barely take a full breath. The painkillers made the tiles swim, but the count stayed the same. 47. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to focus on while my own son was standing 6 feet away from my bed, telling the nurse he needed to step out and take a call. That call lasted 4 days. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 69 years old, and I spent 43 years as a structural engineer for the Boston Public Works Department before I retired in the spring of 2022. I inspected bridges, mostly. I crawled under them in the freezing cold, I climbed over them in the August heat, and I signed my name to reports that decided whether thousands of cars could safely cross a span of steel and concrete every morning. People used to joke that I trusted bolts more than I trusted people. They weren't entirely wrong. The accident happened on a Tuesday in late October. I was driving back from a hardware store in Quincy, just a routine trip to pick up a replacement valve for my kitchen sink, when a delivery van blew through a red light at the intersection of Granite Avenue and Adams Street. My old Buick took the full force of the impact on the driver's side door. The next thing I remember clearly is the smell of antiseptic and the sound of someone calling my name from very far away. When I opened my eyes, my son Marcus was standing at the foot of the bed. He was 36 years old, dressed in the kind of expensive charcoal suit he wore to his job as a pharmaceutical sales representative, and he was looking at his phone. Not at me, at his phone. He glanced up when he heard me stir, and the expression on his face wasn't relief or worry, or even mild concern. It was annoyance. Pure, undisguised annoyance. "Dad, you're awake." "Good." He slipped the phone into his pocket. "The doctor says you broke your hip and your collarbone, and there's some kind of bruising on your lung. They want to keep you here for observation." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. He didn't move to pour me water. The plastic pitcher was right there on the rolling table, but he just stood there with his arms crossed. "Listen, Dad, I have a sales conference in Hartford starting tomorrow morning. I've been planning this for months. The regional VP is going to be there, and if I miss it, I can kiss my promotion goodbye." He sighed, the way you sigh when a delayed flight ruins your weekend. "The nurses here are going to take good care of you. You don't really need me sitting around watching you sleep, right?" I managed to get out a single word. "Marcus." I know, but honestly, Dad, this couldn't have come at a worse time. You've always been so independent. I figured you'd actually prefer not having someone hovering." A nurse came in then, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a name tag that read Evelyn Park, RN. She took one look at the scene, my parched lips, the untouched water pitcher, my son edging toward the door, and her mouth tightened into a thin line. "Visiting hours run until 9, sir," she said to Marcus, her tone clipped. "Your father is going to be here for a while. He's going to need help filling out admission paperwork, contacting his insurance, arranging for someone to check on his home." Marcus waved a hand. "Just send everything to my email. I'll take care of it when I get back from Hartford. The address is on file from my mother's hospital stay back in 2019. He turned to me, and I'll never forget the expression on his face when he said the next part, because he didn't bother to lower his voice. He said it like I wasn't even in the room, like I was a problem, a piece of furniture that had inconveniently broken. "He's always been a difficult old man. He'll be fine. He's tougher than he looks." Then he walked out. He didn't kiss my forehead. He didn't squeeze my hand. He didn't even look back. The door swung shut behind him, and the sound it made was the smallest, quietest sound in the world. But it landed in my chest like a sledgehammer. Nurse Park stood very still for a long moment. Then she walked over, poured me a cup of water, lifted my head gently with one hand, and held the cup to my lips. I drank. The water tasted like metal and salt and something else, something I didn't recognize at first. It took me a few seconds to realize it was the taste of my own tears. "Mr. Brennan," she said quietly, "I've been a nurse on this floor for 31 years. I want you to know something. You are not difficult, and you are absolutely not alone." I couldn't answer her. I just nodded and closed my eyes. The next morning, a young doctor named Hassan came by to walk me through the prognosis. The hip would need surgery, a partial replacement, scheduled for Thursday. The collarbone would heal on its own, but it would take 6 to 8 weeks. The lung bruising was mild, but they wanted to monitor it because of my age. I would be in the hospital for at least 5 days, then transferred to a rehabilitation facility for another 2 weeks, and then home with in-home physical therapy for 2 months after that. He asked who my emergency contact was. I gave him Marcus's name and number. He asked who would be helping me at home during recovery. I didn't have an answer for that one. Marcus didn't call that day. He didn't call the day after either. On the third day, my younger sister Margaret called from Florida. She had heard about the accident from a neighbor of mine who saw the tow truck haul away my Buick. Margaret was beside herself. She was 72 and recovering from her own knee surgery, and she wanted to fly up immediately. I told her not to. I told her I had everything under control. I lied to my sister because I was too ashamed to tell her the truth, which was that my son had abandoned me in a hospital and gone to a sales conference. On the fourth day, Marcus's wife Brittany called. She was 31. She ran a small business selling essential oils and yoga retreats, and she had been married to my son for 4 years. We had never been close. The first thing she said when I picked up the phone was, "Walter, hi, hope you're feeling better. Listen, I just need to ask you something quick. Marcus mentioned that the front door key to your house is under the planter by the porch. Is that still where it is? We need to grab some of your mail and stuff while you're laid up." I told her yes. I was so dazed by the painkillers and the loneliness that I didn't think to ask why my mail couldn't just sit in the mailbox until I got home. I didn't think to ask why she was going into my house at all. I should have asked. That same afternoon, Nurse Park came in for her shift and sat down in the chair beside my bed. She had a paper coffee cup in her hand and a look on her face that I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Do you have any other family besides your son, a lawyer, an old friend, anyone you trust completely?" I thought about it. There was Frank Delaney, a retired police lieutenant I had known since the 70s. We used to play chess every Sunday at the diner on Center Street. There was Rosa Caruso, the lawyer who had handled my late wife's estate, and who I still exchanged Christmas cards with. There was my old foreman from Public Works, a man named Theodore Hawkins, who now ran a private engineering consulting firm. "Why are you asking me this?" I said. She hesitated. Then she said, "Because I overheard your daughter-in-law talking on her cell phone in the hallway about an hour ago. She didn't know I was there. She was telling someone, and I'm quoting her exactly, that the place was a dump, and they should list it for cash buyers only because the renovation costs would be a nightmare. Then she said, and again I'm quoting, that the old man wouldn't last another year anyway, so it didn't really matter what condition the house was in." I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't surprise. It was the heavy, sinking certainty of a structural engineer who has just spotted the hairline crack that explains everything. The crack had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to look at it. I asked Nurse Park if I could borrow her cell phone. Mine was somewhere in the wreckage of my Buick. She handed it over without a word. I called Frank Delaney first. Frank showed up at the hospital 90 minutes later, still wearing the windbreaker and Red Sox cap that he had worn to the chess game I had missed that Sunday. He pulled the visitor chair close to my bed, leaned in, and said, "Walt, what the hell is going on?" I told him everything. The accident. Marcus walking out. The 4 days of silence. Brittany's call about the house key. The conversation Nurse Park had overheard. When I finished, Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Walt, I spent 38 years on the Boston PD. I have seen a lot of ugly things people do to the people who are supposed to love them. But I want you to listen to me very carefully. Before you do anything else, before you confront anyone, before you make any decisions, you need 3 things. You need a lawyer, you need a good private investigator, and you need to know exactly what they have done and what they are planning to do." He pulled out his notepad and started writing names. By the next morning, Rosa Caruso was sitting in the same chair Frank had occupied. She was 64 now, her dark hair shot through with silver, and she still wore the same gold pen in her jacket pocket that she had used to draft my wife's will 11 years earlier. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes in her tight, careful handwriting. When I was done, she set down the pen and folded her hands on her lap. "Walter, I need to ask you something difficult. Did you, at any point in the last few years, give Marcus power of attorney over any of your assets? Did you add him to any bank accounts? Did you sign anything related to your house?" I thought hard. The painkillers made it difficult to remember clearly. Then it came back to me. About 18 months ago, Marcus had brought over what he called a simple healthcare directive, the kind of form that just designated him to make medical decisions for me if I was ever incapacitated. I had signed it without reading every page. I had been making him a sandwich at the time. He had been in a hurry. Rosa's expression did not change, but her shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'd like to see whatever you signed. Can you give me permission to obtain a copy from his attorney?" "Of course. And one more thing. I'd like to bring in someone I trust. His name is Desmond Wright. He runs an investigative firm out of Cambridge. He used to do forensic accounting for the FBI before he went private. I want him to take a look at Marcus and Brittany before we make any moves. Can I have your authorization?" I gave it to her. 2 days later, after my hip surgery, I came out of the anesthesia fog to find a note tucked under the water pitcher in Nurse Park's handwriting. It said, "Mr. Wright will visit at 3 p.m. The park rangers also send their regards." I smiled despite the pain. The park rangers, she had a sense of humor. Desmond Wright arrived exactly at 3. He was a tall, soft-spoken man in his 50s, black, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of patient demeanor that made you want to confess every secret you had ever kept. He pulled out a leather portfolio, a small audio recorder, and a fountain pen. "Mr. Brennan, before I ask you anything, I want to tell you what I have already learned in the past 48 hours. I think you should hear it before we go any further." He opened the portfolio. The healthcare directive I had signed 18 months earlier was not just a healthcare directive. The first 3 pages were exactly what Marcus had described. The 4th page, which I had not read, was a durable financial power of attorney that gave my son the authority to manage my bank accounts, sign legal documents on my behalf, and access my safe deposit box if I was deemed mentally incompetent. The document itself was not yet active. It required a doctor's certification of incapacity to take effect. But Brittany had been calling around to physicians for the past 6 days, asking about the process for obtaining such a certification for an elderly father-in-law who had recently suffered a serious head injury and was showing signs of confusion. Desmond slid the next set of papers across the bed. They were copies of emails between Brittany and a real estate agent named Chad Voss in Brookline. The earliest email was dated September 14th, 6 full weeks before my accident. In it, Brittany asked Chad for a preliminary market valuation on a single-family colonial on Linnaean Street in Cambridge, my house. The house my late wife and I had bought in 1987, the house where I had raised my son. The valuation Chad sent back was $840,000. Brittany had replied with a single line. "Perfect. Let's plan to list within 90 days. Husband's father is in declining health, and we expect to have authority by end of year." I sat there with the papers in my lap, and I could not feel my hands. Desmond went on. Marcus had been quietly sliding into financial trouble for nearly 2 years. His sales numbers had been declining. He had been disciplined twice for falsifying expense reports, including charging the company for a weekend in Newport that had nothing to do with work. His current credit card debt was just over $58,000 across 4 accounts. Brittany's essential oils business had lost money every quarter for 2 years running. Their mortgage was 3 months behind. But the real picture, the picture that made my chest go cold and quiet, was buried in Brittany's text messages, which Desmond had obtained through a legal channel he politely declined to explain. She had been texting her sister in Rhode Island for over a year. The messages were not subtle. They discussed timelines. They discussed which contractor would be cheapest for cosmetic repairs to maximize the sale price. They discussed whether it would be easier to have me declared incompetent and moved into a state-funded nursing home, or whether they should simply wait for, and these were her exact words copied from a text dated August 22nd, nature to take its course given his age and stress level. I closed my eyes. I thought about the day Marcus was born, December 1989. A snowstorm so heavy that I had to walk the last 6 blocks to the hospital because no taxi would risk the roads. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike on the sidewalk in front of our house. I thought about his college graduation, how proud I had been, how I had paid off the last of his student loans as a graduation gift so he could start his life without that weight. And I thought about Nurse Park, a stranger 6 days ago, sitting in the chair beside my bed with a paper coffee cup, telling me that I was not alone. I opened my eyes. "Mr. Wright," I said, "what do you need from me to keep going?" He smiled, just slightly. "Your authorization to dig deeper. and your patience. The deeper we go, the cleaner the resolution will be. I would like to follow your son's wife for another 2 weeks. I would like to obtain certified copies of every financial document we have discussed, and I would like Miss Caruso to begin drafting a new estate plan and a revocation of the power of attorney, both of which we will execute the moment you are medically cleared to sign documents. Do it, I said. That night, after he left, Nurse Park brought me my dinner tray. She set it down on the rolling table and started to leave, but I asked her to stay for a moment. Evelyn, I said, and it was the first time I had used her first name. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there is absolutely no obligation. But if this all unfolds the way I think it's going to unfold, I am going to need a witness. Someone who was there from the beginning, someone whose word a judge would believe. Would you be willing to write down what you saw and what you heard, in your own words, and sign it in front of a notary? She didn't even hesitate. Mr. Brennan, I have wanted to do that since the moment your son walked out of this room. The next 9 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Marcus called the hospital exactly twice. Both calls were to the billing department, asking about the running total of charges and whether my insurance would cover the rehabilitation facility. He never asked to be transferred to my room. Brittany sent a single text message. Hope you're feeling better. Marcus is slammed at work. We'll come visit when things calm down. I did not reply. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Frank Delaney drove me directly to the rehabilitation facility in Newton. He had stocked the room with my reading glasses, a stack of books from my own shelves, my favorite wool cardigan, and a framed photo of my late wife Catherine that he had retrieved from my bedroom. He had also, without my asking, changed every lock on my house and installed a small security camera above the front door. Don't worry about reimbursing me, he said when I tried to thank him. You've bought me coffee for 46 years. We're square. The rehab took 18 days. I worked harder in those 18 days than I had worked at anything in a decade. I wanted to be standing on my own 2 feet for what came next. I wanted Marcus to look at me and not see a frail old man. On day 12, Rosa Caruso brought the new estate plan and the revocation of power of attorney to my room. She brought a notary with her. We executed everything in under an hour. The new plan left my house, my pension residuals, my modest savings, and the contents of my safe deposit box to a charitable trust I had created in Catherine's memory, dedicated to providing scholarships for the children of municipal workers in the Boston metro area. The trust would be administered jointly by Rosa and by Theodore Hawkins, my old foreman. Marcus was named in the document exactly once, in a single sentence at the bottom of page 11, which stated that he had been deliberately and with full intention excluded from inheriting any portion of the estate. Evelyn Park's signed and notarized statement of what she had witnessed in my hospital room was filed alongside the documents. On day 15, Desmond Wright came to see me with his final report. The picture was now complete. Brittany had, 4 days earlier, contacted a second physician, a doctor in Worcester who had a reputation for being willing to certify incapacity on relatively thin evidence. That doctor had agreed to review my case for a fee of $6,000. Brittany had wired him a deposit of $1,500 from a joint account she shared with Marcus. That deposit, Desmond said, is a felony in this state. It is bribery in furtherance of fraud against an elder. The Massachusetts Attorney General's office has an entire division for this. I have already had a preliminary conversation with one of their investigators, off the record, with no names mentioned. They are very, very interested. I asked him what he recommended. That's your call, Mr. Brennan. You can press charges. You can also choose not to. What I would recommend, regardless of what you decide about the criminal side, is a single meeting. You, your lawyer, your son, and his wife, in a room of your choosing. With every document on the table, let them see exactly what you have. Let them understand exactly what their choices are. I thought about it for a long time. Then I asked Rosa to schedule the meeting for the Monday after my discharge, 10 o'clock in the morning, her office on State Street. I asked her to send a brief, polite email to Marcus, inviting him to discuss estate planning matters and a recent family concern. I asked her to make sure Brittany was also invited, by name. The meeting was set. On the Sunday before, Frank Delaney drove me home. The locks were new, the camera was running, and Catherine's framed photo was back on the mantel where it belonged. Frank made me a pot of coffee, and sat with me at the kitchen table while we went over the plan one more time. Then he left me alone in my own house, for the first time in over 5 weeks. I sat in the living room as the autumn sun went down over Linnaean Street. I thought about my son. I thought about the boy he had been and the man he had become. I thought about the moment in the hospital room when he had called me a difficult old man without lowering his voice. And I thought about Catherine and what she would have said if she had been alive to see all of this. She would have told me to be just, not cruel, just. I went to bed early. Monday morning I dressed in my best gray suit, the one I had worn to Catherine's memorial service. I knotted my tie carefully in the mirror and looked at the man looking back at me. He looked tired. He looked thinner than he used to. But he looked steady. Frank picked me up at 9:15. He drove me to State Street and dropped me at the front entrance of Rose's building. I walked in on my own 2 feet, with the help of a single cane that I had earned through 18 days of hard rehabilitation. The receptionist showed me into the conference room. Rosa was already there, with Desmond Wright seated to her right and Evelyn Park, in plain clothes, seated to her left. On the long mahogany table, 4 neat folders were arranged in a row. Marcus and Brittany arrived at 5 minutes past 10. I will never forget the expression on my son's face when he walked through that door. He had clearly expected to see me alone, perhaps with one elderly lawyer. He had not expected the conference room to be set like a tribunal. He stopped in the doorway. Brittany, behind him, made a small, involuntary sound. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. My voice was even. "And you too, Brittany, please." They sat. Marcus's eyes flickered between me and the folders. Brittany's hands were already shaking. Rosa spoke first. She was professional, clear, and devastating. She walked them through the documents. The healthcare directive that had concealed a power of attorney. The phone calls to physicians. The bribery wire transfer. The text messages between Brittany and her sister. The real estate emails dated 6 weeks before my accident. Each folder she opened, she slid across the table toward them. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Marcus's face went through every color a face can go through. He started red. He went white. By the time Rosa was finished, his skin had taken on a strange grayish cast that I had only ever seen in inspection reports of structural failure, the color of concrete that has begun to fail from the inside. When Rosa was done, Desmond Wright spoke. He laid out, in calm and precise language, exactly which state and federal statutes had been violated. He explained that the Massachusetts Attorney General's Elder Fraud Division had been briefed in general terms and was prepared to receive a formal complaint. He explained that the wire transfer alone would, under state sentencing guidelines, likely result in a prison term of between 2 and 5 years for both of them. Then I spoke. "Marcus," I said, "I want you to look at me." He looked up. There were tears running down his face. I do not believe they were tears of remorse. I believe they were tears of fear. You left me in a hospital room. You called me a difficult old man. You walked out the door without looking back. I can survive that. What I cannot survive, what I will not survive, is the knowledge that the boy I raised, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy whose student loans I paid off so he could start his life clean, sat in his kitchen with his wife, and made plans for my death. "Moi de plans, Marcus. Plans." He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. "I am not finished. You are no longer in my will. You are no longer named in my healthcare directive. You no longer have any legal authority over any aspect of my life. The house on Linnaean Street will go, when I am gone, to a scholarship fund in your mother's name. Not a single dollar of mine will ever pass to you. This is not negotiable. This is not a punishment that can be appealed. This is finished." Brittany made a wounded sound. She started to say something. I cut her off. "You signed a wire transfer for $1,500 to bribe a doctor to declare me incompetent? You committed a felony? You did this to my family? You will not speak in this room." She closed her mouth. "Now here is what I am offering, and I want you both to understand that this is not generosity. This is mercy, and mercy is something you have not earned. I am not going to file criminal charges. Not today. The Attorney General's office has the file. It will sit there. If, at any point in the next 10 years, either of you contacts me, contests this estate plan, attempts to interfere with my life in any way, or harasses anyone in this room, the file goes forward. Mr. Wright and Miss Caruso have standing instructions. I will not need to lift a finger." I paused. "There is one more thing. The $85,000 in personal loans I made to you over the past 6 years, Marcus. The down payment on your condo. The 2 cars. The wedding. The trip to Europe. Every one of those was documented as a personal loan in my records. I have promissory notes signed by you for the larger amounts. I am calling those loans due. The total, with the modest interest rate we agreed to, comes to $91,400. Mr. Wright will be in touch about a payment plan. If you default, I will pursue collection through the courts. Marcus made a strangled sound. Dad, please, we can't. We don't have it. I'll lose my job, the condo, everything. You should have thought of that before you decided I was worth more dead than alive. I stood up. It hurt, but I stood up. This meeting is over. Mr. Wright will see you out. I walked out of that conference room with my cane in my left hand and Evelyn Park on my right side, just in case. I did not look back. I did not need to. Frank Delaney was waiting at the curb in his old Chevy. He helped me into the passenger seat without a word. As we pulled away from the curb, he glanced at me. You okay, Walt? I'm okay, Frank. He drove me home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a small wooden box. Inside the box was the brass nameplate that had hung outside my office at Public Works for 31 years. Walter J. Brennan, Senior Structural Engineer. It had tarnished over the years. The brass was dull and the letters had darkened. I took out the polish and a soft cloth and I worked on it slowly, the way Catherine used to work on her grandmother's silver, until the metal began to gleam again under the kitchen light. Some things, I thought, can be restored if you take the time and care. In the weeks that followed, life got quieter. Marcus did not contact me. Brittany did not contact me. Mr. Wright reported that they had hired a lawyer who had reviewed the documents and advised them, in no uncertain terms, to accept the settlement and pay the loans and never speak to me again. Marcus had already lost his job, not because of me, but because his employer had finally caught up with the falsified expense reports during a routine audit. Their condo was on the market. Brittany's sister, after seeing the text messages presented in her sister's lawyer's office, had stopped speaking to her entirely. Evelyn Park retired from Mount Auburn Hospital that December, after 32 years of service. I added her, formally, to the board of the Catherine Brennan Scholarship Fund, with a modest annual stipend for her time. Frank and I went back to playing chess on Sunday mornings. Theodore Hawkins started bringing me consulting jobs, just small ones, just enough to keep my mind sharp. A young engineer in his firm needed help with a bridge inspection report. I read it over a cup of coffee and marked it up with a red pen, and the kids sent me a thank you note that I taped to my refrigerator. Justice, I have come to understand in the last few months of my life, is not the same thing as revenge. Revenge is a fire that burns the man who lights it. Justice is a quieter thing. It is the slow, careful work of holding people accountable for what they have done, of protecting yourself from further harm, and of choosing where and to whom your love and your resources will go from here on out. Justice does not require hatred. It only requires clarity. I keep the brass nameplate on a shelf in my study now. I look at it sometimes when the light is right. It is not new. It will never be new again. It carries the marks of 43 years of being mounted next to a door and bumped by passing shoulders and dusted by tired janitors. But it is mine, and it is whole, and the letters of my name catch the light the way they did on the day I first hung it up. The boy I raised is gone. Maybe he will become someone better someday. Maybe he won't. That is no longer my burden to carry. I carry other things now, lighter things. Things that do not require me to bend my back the wrong way. A scholarship fund. A friendship with a retired police lieutenant. A standing breakfast on Tuesdays with a retired nurse who never once treated me like I was difficult. A house full of memories that nobody is allowed to sell out from under me. Some things, given enough time and care, can be restored. And some things I have learned were never broken at all. They were just buried, for a little while, under the weight of someone else's plans.